Welcome to 108 Idea Exchange, where peers, leaders, and pioneers across association and nonprofits come together, think a little deeper, lead a little wiser, and build organizations that actually hold up under pressure. This podcast is brought to you by 108 Idea Space, and this is the show about talking to great people and understanding from their lives and their experiences. I'm Manny. I'm the host of 108 Idea Exchange, and I'm the growth strategist at 108 Idea Space. And today we did our homework. So this conversation is for association CEOs, operation leads, and membership leads who are trying to answer a hard question, which is how do you keep your organization indispensable when there are workforce pressures, policy keeps shifting, and member experiences spread across so many channels, and the attention span is reducing by the minute. So in this episode, we'll talk about two things. One, first, a clearer lens on what member value actually looks like when things get noisy. And second is where do good organizations quietly create friction, obviously unknowingly, but how do those friction points add up, and what are they doing to fix those? And for all this knowledge, we have our guest Larry Sloan. He's the CEO of AIHA. Larry sits at the intersection of profession building, public policy, workforce development, and member value. He's leading an organization that is not only shaping occupational and environmental health and safety practice, but also trying to make that expertise easier to access, easier to trust, and more useful in a changing world. And I asked this question to Larry before we hit record. Why do you wake up? And he said he wants people to go back home safe. And he wants to make sure that, people are able to work better and they can go back to their families and they're safe. So in preparing for this, I may have gotten a few things wrong. So Larry, I want you to keep me honest and correct me if I go wrong, but it's great to have you here. Thanks for making the time.
Absolutely, Manny. It's a pleasure to be here. Thanks for having me today.
Awesome. So, before we jump into all those questions, I'm curious. I looked you up on LinkedIn, and my question is, does the chemical engineer in you still show up in how you make association decisions today?
Yes, it does. And I think that my chemical engineering background helped get me this job at AIHA because
Awesome.
industrial hygiene or occupational hygiene, as it's known around the world, is a very technical discipline. And as you can imagine, there are a lot of chemical engineers that become industrial hygienists. So
Mm,
my engineering background has served me well across all of the jobs that I've had in my life. Because, I started out as an engineer and then I entered the marketing side of things, the business side of things. And then I was in sales for a while before entering nonprofit. And so I always view that the engineering mentality allows me to think very process oriented. And when you're dealing with association problems, you need to make sure you have a very defined process. And that
yeah,
really flows down from even the association's strategic plan. The strategic plan is your guide star, it's your roadmap. But what you do with that plan is critical. And I think that my engineering mentality helps me take the strategic plan and break it down into kind of digestible pieces. So I think it suits me very well.
that's right. That's awesome. Amazing. And, Larry, we feel that this conversation with you matters right now because I see a lot of association leaders are trying to answer the same question as once is how do we keep our organization relevant, useful, and trusted when the environment is moving quickly around us? And obviously AI is changing by the minute and it's changing expectations from people. So I think that's why this conversation is very timely, very important. And I want to start very simple, Larry. And the question that I had in mind is, and I'm trying to frame it as we go. I think, what challenge do you see leaders wrestling with in their minds most often when it comes to keeping a professional community relevant and engaged in a world that changes faster than their systems actually do?
Well, I think you need to go back to the basics. And I mentioned before the interview began that I have a very rich community of other STEM society CEOs that I talk with on a regular basis. And we go to meetings together and share notes and experiences. And I think that every association has some sort of a top line metric
Yeah.
that they need to basically aim for. And I
Mhm.
think for AIHA and the broader occupational health and safety space, it's the number of illnesses and fatalities that occur in the workplace. There are some statistics, and just very quickly to mention that if you go back to the 5th century BC,
Mhm.
Hippocrates was the first one who associated certain jobs or occupations with adverse health effects.
Okay.
And, 2,500 years later, we still have a lot of work to do, right?
Yeah.
So the International Labor Organization, they estimate today that 1 billion workers around the world are exposed to some occupational health hazards. It could be chemical exposure, biological agent, excessive noise, heat, radiation. And all of these hazards combined lead to around 160 million work-related illnesses per year and
Wow.
2.4 million deaths. So that's one death every 13 seconds.
Wow.
Let that sink in. So I wanted to start with those statistics because that is our North Star. And when I think about everything that we do as an association and all of our programs and services and the things that the members do on a day-to-day basis, ultimately, we got to reduce those numbers.
Yeah. And I'd actually let it sink for another couple seconds. That's one death every 13 seconds. That's a big responsibility on AIHA's shoulders.
Yeah,
Yeah.
yeah, it is.
And I thank you for the mission here. So I guess my next question is, and there's so many other organizations out there who are dealing with similar numbers or who have a mission to make a difference in the world. But despite that, why do those concerns feel, do other concerns feel more convincing? Why does friction creep up? Why does, um, engaging with the community become harder? What do you think is that? What's your theory behind that?
Well, you made a comment earlier about those that are observing or watching TikTok videos in the short attention span. A TikTok video might only be 8 to 10 seconds long, and a lot of folks dial off after 3 seconds.
Yeah.
So I think what a lot of us as association leaders are dealing with is oversaturation of news and information and the challenges that everybody has in their lives to engage. The last thing you want is what we call a checkbook member. You don't want a member to join just to get that annual meeting discount. And of course, there's going to
Uh-huh.
be a large, number of members that do join just to get that annual meeting discount. But the important thing to us is measuring the percentage of members that are somehow engaged in your mission. And,
Mhm.
like other associations, we have committees and working groups and advisory groups, and we count the number of members that are actively engaged. They're serving in some sort of a leadership capacity, they're volunteering, they're working on a project team to update or create a new book or a guidance document. And that is the core nexus of your membership. If you look at AIHA, we have around 7,000 national members. So we're a mid-sized organization. And then we have another 1,500 folks that are members of our chapters around the
Mhm.
country. So all in, we say we represent about 8,500 professionals. But unfortunately, not all 8,500 of those professionals are actively engaged. And
Mhm.
so we strive to figure out new and innovative ways to engage those professionals. Like micro volunteering opportunities are becoming very, very popular and much more appealing to folks that just don't have the time to sit on a standing committee or serve as an officer and make their way up the ranks. And so we try to provide other avenues for members to engage in a meaningful way. So member engagement, I think, across all organizations, whether they're STEM or not, is a very critical challenge for us as association leaders. The other major issue that's facing AIHA, particularly over the last year, is just the politics of the day and
Mhm.
decisions that are being made here in Washington. These decisions are adversely potentially impacting the mission of the association. And I'll just take an example from last year where NIOSH, which is the National Institute for Occupational Safety and Health, was subject to a 90% reduction in force by DOGE. So on April 1st, 2025, we woke up and we learned that 90% of the employees within NIOSH lost their jobs. They were
Wow.
all put on administrative leave with the anticipation that where they were going to be officially terminated within a matter of 2 or 3 months. Now, the bright spot in all this is that those workers that decided to stay on the payroll are back in their jobs. So we were very excited to hear in January of this year that they've all been brought back. But the damage that had been done over the last 10 months caused them a good 25% attrition. And now the agency has become handicapped and it's going to take years to rebuild. We never thought that the politics here in Washington would adversely affect our profession so significantly and so profoundly. So I just want to use that as an example to kind of set the stage for these kind of gotcha moments that you never really expect to experience as you start a new year as the association CEO.
Yeah. Now, this brings a question to my mind, and I wonder if other CEOs in your position are thinking of it. But you talked about process-driven approach because your engineering background. When things get overwhelming, just like you just mentioned, what's like what's the smallest next right action that you would take to gain some clarity? Because I'd assume before taking actions, you want to take a step back, look
Sure.
at it from a 50,000 feet, or I don't know, but what's the next best thing that you do? Maybe one step, a tactical thing to regain clarity.
Very good question. I always say, and having done this now for over 20 years in three different CEO roles, it's the community that you build. And I would think that all of the listeners today feel a good sense of community in their respective profession. Whatever profession that they represent, they have a community of other associations, of other stakeholders that they can turn to help tackle a big thorny issue. And
Mm,
so, with respect to the federal government's actions last year with NIOSH, the first thing we did is we turned to our network of other, I call them sister associations in the occupational health and safety space. And that helped to frame the issue from a very kind of grassroots perspective. And those conversations that we had on and around April 1st helped us decide what our next path forward was going to be and what it was going to look like. I could say
mm,
the same thing with the pandemic. In 2020, the pandemic hit, and we immediately knew that we had to take a leadership role in stepping up and helping small businesses in particular safely
yeah,
reopen their doors because everything was shut down for a good 6 to 8 weeks. And
yeah,
we took a step back as an association before we just decided to do something to map out what is the first little step that we can take that's going to help address this big, unwieldy issue. And I could say that's the recurring theme across all of the challenges that I personally had to lead us through over the last 10 years at the helm of AIHA. You break the big problem into little pieces and you take it a piece at a time.
yeah. Okay. Um, I mean, even though it sounds doable, I'd assume there are a lot of nuances
Oh, yes.
that every association would have to realize as they do it. But yet, I think a lot of times when there's an overwhelming amount of information coming your way, the biggest challenge becomes how do you tune out all the other noises and look at that one small problem at a time. But that's great advice. And so now we have understood some of the problems. Let's steer a little bit towards what can be done. So at the highest level, for your organization, what are you ultimately trying to make true for your members, or for the profession, or for the workers those professionals serve? So what are you trying to make true for this industry, for your industry?
Well, I mean, I think at the end of the day, all of us as association leaders have a responsibility first for our members, because those are the ones that are paying the dues, and those are typically the core volunteers. And so our responsibility is to empower our members to do more in their day jobs, right? How can they be better professionals? And so the tools and the resources and the education that we provide as an association helps to empower our members to do more. One
Okay.
of the tools that we developed many years ago is something called the Industrial Hygiene Professional Pathways Program. It's
Okay.
basically mapping your career from student to early career to mid career to senior career to retiree. And throughout this journey as a professional, we identify technical skills, managerial skills, and then leadership skills, which is giving back to the association, that you should be able to focus on each and every step throughout your career. So, for example, when you're a student member, you want to get more engaged in the technical side of your knowledge, right? You want to get up to speed on the
Yeah.
various disciplines that make you a better industrial hygienist. And maybe you become a leader in your student chapter at your university. But then as you make your way through your career, you're going to be managing a person or teams of
Yeah.
people. So you have to understand the people side of things. And then as you progress in a company or as a consultant, you need to be able to have these higher level conversations with senior management. And you need to be able to define and defend your decisions that you're making as an industrial hygienist from a business forward perspective.
Hmm.
So we as an association need to provide our members with all of these tools in our toolbox to help
Yeah.
them be better at what they do day after day after day. And there's a lot of tools that we have developed over the years that we think make the professional much better at making judgments, much better at
Yeah.
doing risk assessments, and developing risk management plans to help their employer or their client protect their workers better from workplace hazards. That's really the core of what we do as an association.
Hmm. Now, it sounds like there's a bunch of things that you mentioned here, but what stuck with me is the pathway program that you built was kind of to build a connected journey of
Mhm.
someone who aspires to be in this industry and what their whole career could look like. Obviously, every person has their own journey, but this is kind of like a guided program for them to, you know, I mean, I was talking to my sister the other day, and I was like, if you walk a mile without knowing where you're going, it feels longer. But when you know where you're going, what the milestone's going to be, what you're going to spot in the middle, you can probably walk 8 miles and you won't even feel it that much. So I feel the value behind it. But when you look at this honestly, like when you look at your dashboards or back office reporting and things like that, how do you know whether it's working or not? Like, what are the signals that you trust the most that your strategic objective is actually working for your members?
For me, I'm a very much a people person and I travel around quite a bit and I speak at our chapters around the country. We call them local sections. And for me, it's a lot of anecdotal feedback, right?
Okay.
I make myself as visible and transparent as possible. And that's really been my mantra from day one. So when I am visiting sections around the country, I might be presenting and doing an update on the association. And that's those hallway conversations or the association or the conversations during the breaks. The feedback that I'm getting, or at our annual conference, we'll have 3,000 plus people on site. And
Yeah.
as you can imagine, I'll walk down, the hallways of the convention center or the headquarters hotel, and people are coming at me left and right. It's those little snippets of conversation that help me gauge. It's a barometer of how we're doing it as an association, right? Now,
Hmm.
yes, we have formal membership satisfaction surveys. Matter of fact, we're launching one right now. We do that every so many years, and there's great feedback we get from that. And we have other pulse check surveys that we do, but it's really that anecdotal feedback and just the overall energy that I feel when I'm sitting in on committee calls throughout the year that tells me that we are doing the right thing. And overwhelmingly, sure, you're not going to be able to please everybody all the time. But on balance, if you're getting a lot more, kudos and this is great or this is innovative or hadn't really thought of it this way, if you're getting a lot of commentary like that from your base, you're on the right track. And I have felt through all of the challenges, and I just mentioned two of the many challenges that I've dealt with, COVID, and then, of course, the federal government actions last year. Throughout the whole tenure that I've been through, I have felt that we are on an upward trajectory and that we're continuing to go upward because we're doing a pulse check of what the members want and need. And
Yeah.
so our members like to complete surveys, and so that we're in a good position because
That's
we always
good.
get a lot of spirited, passionate feedback from our constituents.
That's actually a good place to be in, I'd say. This reminds me of I think a thought leader webinar by Tony Robbins, and someone asked him what's the best skill an entrepreneur or a leader must have, and he said seeing patterns. And
Mhm.
I feel if you're able to walk through 3,000 people, hear their comments, and then retain all that knowledge and see patterns and then come back with things that they need, you have a good sense of looking through patterns and working on it. So like kudos to you on that. Um, I wonder if leaders could build that skill to hear anecdotal feedback and then work on it, or is there any other way that, for example, if your membership grows from 8,500 to 85,000, how do you scale that skill for your team and your staff and other people around you?
Well, to kind of address the first part of your question, I have to bring one of my favorite topics into this podcast, and that's emotional intelligence.
Uh-huh.
And a lot of people who are listening know all about EI, and I'm certainly no expert, but I've read about it and I've done some presentations to our membership about it over the last many years. And EI is really about kind of training your brain to not overreact to every piece of stimuli that you receive, particularly the negative stimuli, because we all get negative stimuli, we get unpleasant stimuli, we get feedback from our members, from our boards, from our staff. My staff does it, my senior leadership team does a 360 evaluation on me once or twice a year. And I'm always amazed at the perceptions of others on my performance, where I'm like, huh, that's a very insightful piece of feedback that I would never have thought somebody would have in their brain, as to, well, I'm making a particular decision or doing a certain action and the way it's being interpreted by the other person. So I would say to you that the ability to filter out the unproductive feedback when you're
Mm,
in the moment and really focus on things that you can control, recognizing that everybody is entitled to their own opinion, right? Everybody's entitled to say whatever they want to you, but to not let it kind of eat at you or get to you. Because if you
yeah,
start focusing on that negativity, you're not going to have that open mind to hear the other stuff, right? So I have a conversation with somebody and they lit into me about something, and 5 minutes later, I'm still thinking about it. You have to train your brain to kind of compartmentalize. And that is a lot easier said than done.
yeah,
Now, scaling from 8,500 to 85,000 members, and I know you use that sort of just as a kind of an off the cuff analogy or a metaphor, but you scale it up by just keeping that open mind. Now, obviously, you're not going to be able to be as attentive when you scale by 10x like that. But to me, it's the ability to process somebody's request or comment, and then
mm,
if action is required, to close the loop with that person in a reasonable amount of time. And
mm,
I have often been complimented that I have almost too much of an open door policy. And you know what? Maybe I do. Or maybe I'm responding too quickly, too often. But having my sales background from my earlier days in my career has wired my brain to say to myself, well, our members are our customers. The
yeah,
folks that attend our conference are our customers. So everybody counts. And if I
yeah,
can respond within a day or two or a week and answer somebody's concern, that's going to help them feel better about their experience with the association. And
yeah.
then they might tell somebody who might tell somebody and so forth. And then that grows the dynamic, right, around the appeal, the curb appeal of your association. So every interaction you make as an association leader matters.
That's beautiful. And I wonder if that attribute helped us get you on this podcast. So I appreciate that. Now, one thing that I was taking away and what stood out to me was while you were explaining EI and all the other things that you do, you never once steered away from member value because your customers, your members are your customers, their learning pathway, their growth, their achievements, and all those things. And I wonder if many associations are looking at the right challenge in the wrong way when they think about member engagement. A lot of people that I speak to, they think the issue is whether they have enough content, they have enough messaging, enough programming, enough visibility. But I wonder if the deeper issue may be whether members, or for your case, employers, or the broader field can actually find, trust, and use that value fast enough. And I think fast enough is a key word here because time is of the essence for all these people who we are serving. So, are we sometimes solving the most visible part of the problem? And here it's called the street lamp theory. You look for things below the street lamp, knowing that you've probably lost your keys in the dark, right? So, are we probably solving the visible part of the problem, or the thing we can count easily, or the things we can see easily, like events or content, uh, even though there's something deeper that we need to focus on?
It's a good question. And, I think that if you look at the overall value proposition of an association, there's a kind of a notorious gripe amongst us association leaders that organizations like ours have a really tough time sunsetting things, right? They want to keep adding Christmas tree ornaments on the tree. And this is something that I brought to our board's attention from my very first year, that we only have so many hours in the week and so many staff, and we have to define what our priorities are. And you know what? We may need to take a step back and stop doing certain things. And that is not easy for most organizations to do. I would love to find an organization that's good at that. But
Mm-hmm.
we are having those difficult conversations as a board. We just came off a board meeting last weekend where we decided to slow down on a couple programs that are not delivering the value that they did, say, 5 or 10 years ago. Or we're not going to focus on this particular type of education. So more is not better. Sometimes less is more. We're pruning our volunteer groups. Every time you have a committee within the association, you need to have a leadership team. You need to have a chair and a vice chair and a secretary. And, that takes time for people to serve in those roles. Well, do we necessarily need 55 or 60 different committees? Can we kind of consolidate and maybe bucket one or two committees under others where you have working teams within a committee so you don't need all those officers? And the answer is most likely you can. Do you
Mm-hmm.
need to have all of this education that perhaps is not as cutting edge as it was back 10, 15 years ago? The answer is probably not. You have to focus on those key trends and drivers and then create new education around those themes. The other
Yeah.
thing that we're doing as an association is we recognize that the education that we provide in industrial hygiene is not just for the industrial hygienist, but it's also for what we call these allied association folks, these partners. So in the occupational health and safety space, you have the industrial hygienist that really focuses on the health side. But then there's also safety professionals, and there's also environmental health and safety generalists, EHS generalists. A lot of smaller companies only have one EH&S generalist on staff, or they might only
Mm-hmm.
have one safety professional on staff. They don't even have an industrial hygienist. So if we can educate these allied professionals in the fundamentals of industrial hygiene, when they're being asked to do a little bit more that's not quite in their swim lane, we can provide that training to them. That means we're making a difference and we're providing a positive impact on those other populations. We don't
Yeah.
expect them to become members of AIHA, but we want to educate them in their particular swim lane. And that's a direction we've gone in over the last several years is we've got to expand outside of our bubble and begin serving these allied professionals that touch our space.
Mhm. That's a great response, and I think two things that I'd keep from this response is, one, less is more. And what we mean by that is, yes, we want to have more channels to communicate, more more programming, more content. But a lot of times we need to look back at it and see, okay, if this is the status quo, does is it serving our members now?
Mhm.
Yes, of course it served them, because 10 years ago when we built it, the situation was different, but now the industry has evolved, your members' expectations have evolved, and we need to look at it again and reevaluate it. So that's one piece. But the
Mhm.
second piece that you mentioned was, how can we expand our capacity by
Mhm.
partnering with ally industries? And I kind of have an analogy for this. When you're traveling, and you pack your suitcases, right? There's only so much space in a suitcase. But if you look at it, if you try to squeeze in 10 shoes and three suits and a lot of sweaters and whatnot, it's not going to close, and it's going to become a capacity issue. And it's only going to cause you problems if the zip breaks or something else breaks. And typically when things break, they just scatter everywhere, and that's similar, and by scattering the association space, I feel membership decline, member satisfaction issues, and things like that. Now, if the association is a suitcase, you know, what happens when organizations keep stuffing in programs, more channels, more stakeholder expectations, more urgency, but never really either increase their capacity or reevaluate what they're offering and why they're offering? What's your theory behind that?
Yeah, I mean, quite simply, it breaks, right? So the more that you stuff into a suitcase, the more that you provide or offer as an association, the bandwidth, the capacity of your existing staff to handle all of these competing issues results in burnout, right? It results in quiet quitting. And then you start seeing attrition. It's interesting with AIHA because we're all about worker health and safety. I didn't mention psychosocial as a hazard in the workplace, but that is a clear and present hazard. It's just as clear and present as the physical hazards that I mentioned at the top of the hour. And I have to bring that back to my staff because psychological safety and psychosocial stress refers and applies to my staff doing their jobs just as much as the members of the association counseling and advising their employees, if you will.
Yeah,
And if you are doing too much with too little, you're not going to do anything well. And
yeah,
everybody's going to feel overly pressured, and then they're going to be running around like chickens, and nothing's going to be done to the level of quality that is expected of the association. And so when we look at our strategic plan and we update the plan formally every 3 years, I love the fact that it's a living document so that our board of directors looks at it whenever it needs to. And we make adjustments to the top line objectives and even some of the strategies that support those objectives. And then we measure success against the plan at each and every board meeting. And then I bring that plan in house and I look at the staff and I say, let's make sure everybody on our team, all 55 employees, understand how they support the plan in their own unique way. And I constantly
mhm,
revisit the plan and I constantly remind our team the value that each and every person on staff provides and supports the plan. It's really important.
yeah. And that's a good thing. This reminds me of three aspects to making anything work. I think there's people, there's process, and then there's like supporters like technology and platforms, right? You talked about people, you talked about processes, but talk to me about platforms and how platforms can add friction or actually catalyze the effort that you're making.
Yeah, absolutely. And that's a very timely question with AI. And we had a great conversation at our board meeting over the weekend about we know that AI is here to stay. And
Yeah,
we know and we applaud that our staff are starting to play around with AI tools in helping to make their jobs a little more efficient. They're using AI to draft communication plans, outlines. They're using AI to create the first draft of a PowerPoint presentation or to develop the first draft of a letter or to fine tooth or finalize a letter. I mean, the applications for AI are countless.
yeah.
However, the conversation that we're dealing with now is what do we need to be doing as an association to invest in AI systems, because it's not just one tool, to make the user member experience more efficient and more effective. So we're literally starting to map out. We have all of this data that we collect across the enterprise, right? We have member satisfaction or dissatisfaction data from surveys. We have history of transcript data from members and customers that are participating in courses and annual meetings. I mean, the list of data sources goes on and on and on. How do we synthesize all this data and analyze it to our advantage? And then based on that analysis, how do we utilize AI systems to make the
Mhm.
experience for the member or the purchaser, the customer, more seamless, more efficient? And that starts with something really basic, like our website right now is going through a major redesign. And I would imagine that many people listening in can relate to what I'm about to say. But our website right now is kind of a hot mess. It's very, very hard to find what it is that you're looking for because we've built upon, built upon, built upon over the years, and it's just not efficiently organized and laid out. So one of the things that we're going to be focusing on with the website upgrade is the search engine and the application of AI so that we can really optimize that search process so anybody coming to the website can find what they're looking for within 1 or 2 clicks.
Yeah.
And that's going to go a long way because oftentimes when I'm out and about talking to members, the biggest gripe is the website is really difficult to navigate. We can't find anything. So that is one example, one small example of how AI can really benefit an association and help to reduce the burden, the administrative burden on your staff. Because the more that we can automate and streamline from the members' experience, that frees up time for staff to do the higher level thinking, which is what we want them to
Yeah,
do. Yeah.
that's awesome. Now, you shared a lot of things, but what I'm gonna move forward with is the searchability, the findability of resources for your members. Because at the end of the day, I see you're very focused on how members can perceive value and kind of take value. So I'm sure, like many associations, AIHA has learning, publications, community, conference, public resources on the website, advocacy. All of them are contributing to value. How do you look at a connected journey for your members? I mean, and I'm asking this because I see your thought process, just like when you build the pathway, a career pathway for your members. How are you looking at a connected journey for your members on your digital properties? Because if I'm a member of an organization and I have to log into the community to find something else, the learning to find something else, that's gonna hassle me a lot. And typically, as a member, I wake up with a problem in mind, not a mode of delivery in mind. Okay,
Right.
today I'm gonna look for a webinar on X topic. It's
Yep.
typically, okay, this is a problem I want to solve. So how are you connecting all these digital properties together as you're thinking about website and all these AI capabilities to improve searchability of your content?
Well, that's a question that we're going to be addressing over the coming months and years is to how do we make that journey of obtaining that piece of information more seamless and more efficient. There is one thing that we're doing now that I find inspiring, quite frankly, and that's for different rubrics of learning within the field of industrial hygiene. We've created what are called learning pathways.
Yeah.
And the learning pathway is basically a journey to your language where it's not just finding a piece of information on the website. It's starting from the basic ground zero and pulling in articles, blogs, webinars that have been recorded, um,
Hmm.
excerpts from books, and building that knowledge, right, from the base zero to level one, level two, level three. And
Hmm.
it will be a sequential way for the practitioner to acquire a skill set in a particular area of industrial hygiene, pulling together all these different disparate resources in one pathway, if you will. And we've
Yeah.
gotten two of these done right now, and we're going to be developing two or three more this year. So that's just one very concrete example of how we're trying to make the learning experience a little more palatable and less stressful. But I think to your point, in general, if you're trying to find a piece of advocacy information or something that pertains to how do you sign up for the annual conference, we've got to make that user experience more efficient and easier to follow. And I think that's where AI comes into play.
Is there any member or stakeholder experience that, from your perspective, looked strong on the surface, but you are coming to realize that it is more fragile underneath? Maybe the handoff between for a member going from one page to the other, or maybe a handoff from member submitting an application, but how is it processed in the back office? Has something of that sort come to your attention while going through this process?
Well, as I mentioned earlier, we get a lot of constructive feedback on how poor our website is and how difficult it is to find things. I will also say that within our volunteer groups, if a team of members is working on a particular project, you're going to have differences of opinion and different philosophies, and the reconciliation of those varying perspectives is often very messy and
Mm,
often very emotionally laden. And one of the challenges we have is we're trying to bring more students and early career professionals into some of these committees because the old guard is moving on.
yeah,
Well, if you are having a Zoom call and you have this emotional exchange on a call and you've got these new folks that are listening in, they're not necessarily going to be enamored by the dynamic. And so it's a constant struggle of we want to capture this passion, we want to allow the team to norm and storm and come to a reasonable conclusion where, multiple viewpoints are, baked into the final product. but there's also
Mm,
going to be kind of a messiness to it. And we have to, grant ourselves a little bit of grace. And if you're coming to the table as a new participant, recognize that sometimes the conversations won't be all smooth and easy flowing. And
yeah.
that's just the reality of human nature. I view it as the natural output of passion for the
Yeah.
profession or for the association. Our members, like many other STEM societies out there, I'm sure, are filled with thousands and thousands of very passionate members, and that's something that you can't manufacture. It's either there or
Mm,
it's not. And so I take that static oftentimes as a natural byproduct. It's a necessary evil that stems from the passion that people bring to the table.
yeah.
Yeah.
That's true. And again, I'll go back to you looking at patterns and finding what needs to be done. I think these are the nuances that makes a good leader. Thank you so much for sharing that, Larry. And I think there are a lot of key takeaways from the conversation we have had so far. What I wanted to do for our listeners, Larry, is leave them with a tiny experiment. I know we have talked about a lot of member value, member journeys, learning pathways. Um, if an organization is trying to understand what their members need today, what are the gaps, or things like that. What's one tiny experiment that you'd like to leave our listeners with? Is it something like going over and looking at the member journey or something else? Like what's coming to your mind?
Well, I mean, I do think that how you can make the member experience more efficient for them. And I think that I'm going to go back to AI. I think that every association needs to do an honest assessment of their member journey, to your point, and figuring out ways to make that experience much more seamless. So I
Mm,
would start with that because the more seamless that experience is, I think that trickles down to member retention, member acquisition,
right.
overall member satisfaction.
That's right. So what I'm taking away from this is, yes, we want to implement AI. Yes, there are so many things that can really help our members, but let's first see where the gaps are, where those intersections are that are causing those this friction points. So maybe for our listeners, here's what we want you to do: map one member journey, just one,
Mhm,
across every system,
mhm,
every team, every touch point it crosses, and no need to optimize it yet. Just see it, observe it,
mhm.
unbiased. And one thing that I want listeners to be mindful of is you're familiar with your systems. Maybe your new member is not familiar with how they have to create an account, how they have to purchase things. So maybe get an intern, get a student volunteer, and get them to do this activity and see what it brings back. And I think that would really bring out some gaps that can be filled because that's the use case where AI can maybe plug in, or you just need to fix your data or something else. So either way, do that tiny homework. Um, uh, Larry, this has been great. We typically end our session with final five.
Okay.
And before I dive into that, I just wanted to leave people with two takeaways that I'm taking from this conversation. First, you know, strong associations don't stay relevant by doing more. That's what I'm taking away. I think they stay relevant by making their value easier to access and easier to act on. And that's what I see you're doing, Larry, by improving your website and things like that. So that's one. And second, when speaking to members, be mindful of one, what patterns are coming up, and two, to Larry's point, sometimes negative criticism, positive criticism can cloud your judgment. Either way, take one problem, look at it clearly, and work off of it. Anything you'd like to add to that, Larry?
I think you want to have fun, right? I mean, let's
Yeah,
just you
that's
want to
good.
figure out a way to derive joy out
That's
of
right.
what it is that you do. I mean, yes, I embrace our mission, and yes, I feel a very personal connection with what it is that my organization does, but I truly embrace the members, the hundreds and hundreds of members that I've come to know over the 10 years. And the overall, and my staff and all the boards that I've worked with over the 10 years, right? That to me is such a critical part of being an association leader is to take joy in each and every personal interaction, whether it's good or
Yeah.
not, because we've
Yeah.
all had unpleasant experiences with any of those stakeholder groups. But to come away with an overall sense of joy and satisfaction on balance means that
Mm,
you're in the right place at the right time. And if you're not, that's also a great sign that it's time to perhaps start looking around for a new opportunity. And that's okay. That
that's
is
right.
okay. So it's a
That's
really nice barometer of how you feel against the various stakeholder groups that you deal with on a day-to-day basis.
that. Thank you so much. Now, stepping into our final five, Larry. All right. So for this segment, answer in one word or a phrase. All
Okay.
right. No long answers. What's the best advice you've heard about leading a profession through change?
Adding more and more programs and services because the feeling is that it's going to appeal to more and more folks.
Yeah. On the contrary, when you get targeted and when you get very specific, that makes a lot of difference. Thank you. What's one signal that tells you a profession is getting stronger, not just louder?
Well, tracking the overall statistics. I mentioned the injury and illness and fatality data. If we see a declining trend in those statistics, you're doing the right thing.
Awesome. What's one AIHA initiative or idea people should stop overlooking?
We launched something called improving exposure judgment, which is quite simply, it's the use of statistics in analyzing a data set.
Okay.
By following this program, we feel they become a more um, competent professional in the field.
Hmm. Awesome. Thank you so much. And maybe we can drop a link to this initiative if there is.
Mhm.
And my final question, if every association leader had to follow one rule or one principle about member value, what would yours be?
Engagement. The
Engagement.
more members that are engaged in some capacity demonstrates your value proposition to those folks. It's
That's
not the
am-
number of members, it's the number of engaged members.
that's right. Awesome. So this has been really helpful, Larry. Thank you so much for spending this hour with us. Any final comments or anything that I didn't ask, but I should have asked?
This has been an amazing conversation with you, and we could have taken this in 25 different directions. So thanks for the opportunity, and I look forward to continuing the conversations in the future.